Christmas, folks. It is so good to be with you. My name's Magness. I'm one of the ministers here, and I am so glad you're here. If you're a guest with us today, welcome. Maybe you're in town visiting somebody for Thanksgiving. We're glad you're worshiping with us today. Listen, thank you so much to all of you who have already been working to help us begin Christmas. Thank you to those who decorated. The church looks beautiful. Thank you to all the people who sang last night at the Christmas tree lighting. You were fantastic. Thanks to all the people that are making chili for the chili cook-off and carol singing tonight. There's going to be plenty of food, so come for that. We'll have a good time. There's so much that I want to tell you about as we're kicking off the Christmas season here this week. I want to talk to you about our end-of-year offering. Maybe on the way in, somebody handed you one of these little cards that says Cannonball Christmas. If you have been around here a while, you know that every year we kind of challenge ourselves to make our end-of-year generosity significant for God's kingdom. And usually the way we do that is by giving away an extra percentage of all that's given into special mission projects just for the month of December. We aren't doing it exactly the same way this year because we're already in a 2-year season where we're giving away a significant percentage of all that is given into mission projects. We're in this 2-year season called Cannonball, and you may remember that during this season, before it goes to our budget, 10% of everything that's given is going to these 4 impact projects, mission trips, raising up the next generation of leaders, church planting, that sort of thing. And then another huge percentage is going toward the long-term mission of the church through the Legacy Fund, preparing our building to serve us for the next 50 years, and then the remainder goes to our budget. So our end-of-year giving this year is focused on helping us continue to move forward strongly with Cannonball. Hopefully you got one of these on your way in. I would love for you to grab that, take a look at it. Maybe you want to read it, get more information. I hope that you will put it somewhere where it can remind you to be in prayer for the generosity of this church during the Christmas season. We've got to make some significant decisions next spring about the scope and pacing of our legacy project to repair the building for the next 50 years. And a lot of those decisions will be based off our end-of-year generosity. And so if you want to help us move that forward faster, if you kind of believe in the vision of where we're headed, the end of year is an important time for that. If you've got questions about that project, you can stop by the Cannonball wall or come ask me or read this. There are links on here to where you can get more information. I want you to be informed about how that project is going. Also, of course, we will be continuing to invest in the impact projects, and you'll be hearing more about those throughout the month of December. The other thing I want you to know about that kind of kicks off today is this Matthew experience that we're doing. For the next 29 weeks, our Sunday morning experience will be rooted in the Gospel of Matthew. Why 29 weeks? Well, there are 28 chapters in the book of Matthew. So if you start reading Matthew tomorrow and you read 1 chapter a week, you'll finish Matthew right before our last sermon on Matthew. So kind of will bookend it for you. To help you with that, we've produced these reading guides. They'll be available as you leave. Adam will give you more information later about how to get one. I hope that everybody gets one. And you'll see, so like if you turn inside the first page, you'll say Matthew 1, December 2nd through 6th. That's tomorrow. So if you grab one of these guides, and then tomorrow it has a reading for each day. It includes the text of the gospel, Matthew, but then also supplemental texts to help you understand what you're reading in Matthew. It's got a place for notes, maybe for the sermons, or for your reading. There are lots of ways to stay connected with this Matthew project over the next 29 weeks. You can go online. We got a Matthew page. I'll show it to you later. But there'll be videos there, one each week, going through chapter by chapter with Janet Galante and my dad, actually, teaching through the Gospel of Matthew that way. Many of our groups are going to be studying Matthew at various points throughout these next 29 weeks. So I hope you'll be all in with Matthew. Our preaching is going to be all from Matthew during those 29 weeks as well. We won't be going through it kind of in order. We'll be doing, a series on parables and a series on discipleship and a series on the Sermon on the Mount. but we are going to start at the beginning. We will start, in fact, all of December is going to be Matthew chapter 1 and chapter 2. And today we're going to start right at the beginning of Matthew chapter 1 with the genealogy of Jesus. And we'll be here for 4 weeks. So if you've got a Bible, maybe you brought one with you, or if you look under the chairs in front of you, I want you to find Matthew chapter 1. Maybe you want to pull it up on your phone. If you're using the Bibles that are in the chairs there, it's on page 800 and let me find it, 827. 827, so if you want to follow along there. And we're going to start in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. I want your eyes on it. We're going to read the first 17 verses, and we'll learn from those today. All right, here we are. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. You know, I'm just thinking, this is going to get super boring. Maybe we can make this more interesting. Nathan, are you there still? He's still here. Nathan! Yeah. Okay, yeah, come here a second. Did you know, Nathan, that someone has turned this text into a song?
You told me about it, yeah.
Yeah, did you get a chance to work on that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, great. I think this would be more fun. Keep your eyes on the text. We were in verse 2. Okay, can you pick up in verse 2? Okay, we were in verse 2, so keep your eyes on the text. We'll see if he gets all the names right. Okay, go ahead, Nathan.
Abraham had Isaac, Isaac he had Jacob, Jacob he had Judah and his skin. Then Perez and Zerah came from Judah's woman Tamar. Perez he brought Hezron up, and then came Aram, then Amminadab, then Nahshon, who was then the dad of Salmon, who with Rahab fathered Boaz. Ruth she married Boaz, who had Obed, who had Jesse. Jesse he had David, who we know as king. David, he had Solomon by dead Uriah's wife. Well, Solomon, well, you all know him. He had good old Rehoboam, followed by Abijah, who had Asa. Asa had Jehoshaphat, had Joram, had Uzziah, who had Jotham, then Ahaz and Hezekiah. Followed by Manasseh, who had Aman, who was Aman, who was a father of a good boy named Josiah, who grandfather Jehoiakim, who caused the Babylonian captivity because he was a liar. No joke, pretty bad dude, yeah. Then he had Shealtiel, who begat Zerubbabel, who had Abiud, who then had Eliakim. Eliakim had Azar, who had Zadok, who had Achim. Achim was the father of Eliah. Then he had Eleazar, who had Nathan, who had Jacob. Now listen very closely, I don't want to sing this twice. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Christ.
Woo! All right. Fantastic. Thank you, Nathan. And hey, for all you who are like, I want to sing along, we're going to sing it again in 2 weeks. So I expect you to go home, get on YouTube, and search for Matthew's Begats. That's the name of the song. You can learn it in 2 weeks, and we'll all sing it together, and you'll get all the names right. It'll be great, okay? And that, if you were following along, that was Matthew chapter 1 through 16. And that's Jesus' family tree, which means that it's our family tree. And so we're going to spend the next 4 weeks seeing what we can learn from the family tree of Jesus, which is our family tree. And today, we aren't going to kind of go very deep, and we're not going to look for anything subtle today. Today, we're just going to notice the two most obvious things to learn from the family tree of Jesus, which is our family tree. The two things that everybody who ever studies this or comments on it or talks about it, the two things that just sort of leap off the page at you. The first thing that everybody notices who looks at this text is that this is the genealogy of a king. It says so right at the top. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. The word Messiah means anointed, but in particular, in this case, it means an anointed king that God would send to rule and reign eternally over God's people. This is the king who was promised and the king who will keep all of God's promises. And Matthew structures this genealogy the way the ancient Jewish kingly genealogies were structured to demonstrate that Jesus is the descendant of kings and he is the king. That's the first thing that everybody notices. It's the very first verse. It's the heading for the text. This is the genealogy of the Messiah. But the second thing that everybody notices, you read a commentary on this text or anybody exploring the meaning and significance of this text, the thing that everybody notices next, and what we're going to notice today, is that Matthew has on purpose included in this genealogy the least likely people to ever show up in a king's genealogy. People he did not have to mention, people that he could have ignored. In fact, we know Matthew skips other people. Sometimes it doesn't go father, son, father, son. Sometimes it goes father, grandson. And he just leaves somebody out he doesn't want to talk about. He could have skipped anybody he wanted. And yet these four unlikely people get included on purpose. You see, most genealogies of Jewish kings are lists of Jewish men. That makes sense, right? If you want to prove you are a king, you prove that you're descended from kings. And the kings were all men. That's the way king works. And so the genealogies were all these lists of men. And this genealogy, don't get me wrong, it's mostly lists of Jewish men, right? One after another, after another, after another. But it isn't just Jewish men. There are 4 women on the list. Women Matthew did not have to include and did not have to mention. Women that he included on purpose. And in fact, he doesn't just include them. They get special attention. They break up the rhythm of the text and you notice them. You pay attention to them. And what we're going to discover is that the women that Matthew includes, they're complicated. Here they are. There's Tamar in verse 3. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Now, if you don't know Tamar's story, then you should get one of those reading guides, because one of the supplemental texts for this week is the story of Tamar. And what you will discover is that it's a terrible story. She is twice widowed, and then her father-in-law, Judah, kicks her out of the family. And so now she's widowed and homeless. Until she hears that Judah, her father-in-law, who should have been obligated to take care of her because she was married to Judah's son, who isn't taking care of her, Judah is going on a business trip. And so she travels to the town where Judah is going on a business trip, and she dresses up like a temple prostitute. And Judah is out of town, and he sleeps with her. And he gets her pregnant. And then Judah hears she's pregnant, and so Judah's like, you clearly committed adultery. We're going to kill you. And she writes back and says, ha, the kids are yours. And he realizes that he's the one who has in fact abandoned God and put Tamar in this horrible position. And God intervenes and she's reconnected into the family. And Tamar is in Jesus' family tree. And remember, Matthew didn't need to mention, let's be clear. If Matthew hadn't mentioned Tamar, how many of you would have been just reading along, Judah begat Perez, and you'd have been like, Perez, isn't that Tamar's boy? No, none of you would have done that. You don't know. Matthew included her on purpose so that we wouldn't forget this lady. In verse 5, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Rahab was a foreigner, one of the enemies of Israel. She also happens to have been a religious prostitute. That was sort of a thing in Canaan. She rescued the spies who spied on Jericho, and so in turn, when they defeated Jericho, they rescued her. And she's in Jesus' family tree. There's Ruth, verse 5. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Ruth, like Tamar, was a widow from tragic circumstances. She was a foreigner, not just any foreigner. She was a Moabite, and the Israelites hated the Moabites. They fought with them for like 500 or 700 straight years. They hated them, couldn't stand them. Ruth was one of those people. Now, she wasn't a temple prostitute. She was actually a remarkable, faithful woman, but she was this foreigner widow. There's Bathsheba mentioned here, Matthew chapter 6, Matthew 1 verse 6. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Bathsheba also likely a foreigner. Uriah was a foreigner, so probably his wife was. Bathsheba is the one that King David, great King David, forced into an adulterous affair and then killed her husband to cover it up. So Bathsheba was forced into the relationship, had to hear the news of her husband being murdered, and then watch her first child die as punishment. And these 4 foreign, troubled women all get included on purpose by Matthew in Jesus' family tree. He could have left all 4 of them out and none of us would have even noticed. We wouldn't have even blinked. It would have just been a list of names. That would have felt very list of Jewish men. That's what a Jewish genealogy looks like. And these specifically included individuals into Jesus' family tree are, I would say, the least likely members of Jesus' family tree. And they're unlikely for all 3 of those reasons. They're unlikely because they're women. We already said Jewish genealogies rarely mentioned women. And we know from history that many ancient cultures treated women horribly. Even some cultures that have been influenced by Christianity have treated women horribly. And we have to acknowledge that mistreatment. But it's not in the Bible. The Bible treats women with honor and dignity. As we talked about in our study of Colossians a few weeks ago, the Bible upholds the full beauty and worth and value of women. Even here, including them in the genealogy of kings. These 4 weren't just unlikely because they were women. They were also unlikely because 3 of the 4 we know are foreigners, and in fact all 4 were likely foreigners. And again, isn't it surprising? We need to notice and be surprised that in a genealogy designed to convince us that Jesus is the rightful king of Israel, the king of God's people, the king of God's kingdom, that in such a genealogy, Matthew would go out of his way to mention the foreigners in his family tree. See, Matthew knows. It is a universal human struggle, many thousands of years old, that we humans, up to this present day, we struggle to love those that are different than us. Have you noticed that? The more somebody's like you, the easier it is to care about them. And the more they're different, the easier it is to not care about them. And one of the ways we decide people are different than us is by their national origin. It was true in ancient times, and it's true today. I have a friend. He attends our church. He's a part of our church. He came to America as a student and then became a professor, and now he's a professor here in our area, teaches in our area, and attends this church. We get together every once in a while, and almost every time when we get together, he has stories to tell me about how difficult it is to live as a foreigner in East Tennessee. Here in our hometown, at the restaurants where you eat and the stores where you shop, where you'd never think they would ever have an unkind word to anybody. He always has a story of somebody talking behind his back or talking to his face because He doesn't look like he's from around here. He doesn't talk like he's from around here. And it's true, he doesn't. If you study the history of our country, it's easy to find periods where we have been terribly cruel to one immigrant community after another. You can read about when we were awful to Irish immigrants, or Polish immigrants, or Italian immigrants. Young people don't know this, but when I was a kid, this blows my mind to think about this. When I was a kid, which isn't that long ago, I think, but anyways, when I was a kid, we used to openly tell jokes that were premised on the thought that Polish people are stupid. Like everybody I knew told jokes that the basis of the joke was Polish people are stupid. And we told them and made them up and laughed at them. Like I'm 50. Ask anybody who's 50 and they'll say, yeah, we definitely told jokes the basis of which was that Polish people are stupid. Ask anybody under 40 and they're like, what? You all told jokes about how one group of people were stupid? And I'm like, yes, we did that. You can read about how we treated Japanese immigrants during World War II. And of course, even today, we know that some people treat foreigners with mocking cruelty. I guess the point I'm trying to say is it has always, throughout all of human history, been easy, apparently, to be mean to foreigners. In fact, some ancient religions were designed to be good to one group of people and bad to everybody else. Even some ancient Jews sometimes got this attitude, that God is for us and against others. But God was always clear. The first promise God made to Abraham, I will bless you and make you a great nation. In the very same sentence of that blessing, he says, and through you I will bless all nations. The protections of God's law, which God gave to the people so that they could live in peace in the land, the protections of God's law applied to Jews and to foreigners. Here's an example. It's all over the law, but here's one example. Leviticus 19. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And the prophets kept pointing back to texts like this. And one prophet after another would stand up and say, you want to know why God's mad at you? Well, you're mean to widows, you mistreat orphans, your courts are crooked, you steal from the poor, and you're mean to foreigners. All the time. This was on the list. And so Matthew includes the most unlikely people in the world in the genealogy of Jesus' family tree, which is our family tree, so that we would be clear that the time is now here in Christ that all people of every tongue and every tribe and every nation are invited to be a part of God's kingdom. In fact, one of the distinctives of God's church in every generation, when we truly live like Jesus, one of the distinctives of God's church is how well we treat strangers and immigrants and foreigners and the people who aren't like us. And one of the embarrassments of God's church for 2,000 years in every generation is when we fail to do that. So these inclusions that Matthew makes, they were unlikely because they were women, they were unlikely because they were foreigners, they're unlikely for a third reason too. Unlikely to be included in the genealogy of a king. And that's because they had staggeringly complicated stories. Like if you wanted to impress people with your lineage and your genealogy, you wouldn't bring up these people. Because these women aren't just foreigners and they aren't just women. They also had really, embarrassing stories. The very story of Tamar is an embarrassment to the line of Judah, the family from which the promised Messiah would come. The very story of Bathsheba is an embarrassment to David, the great king whose kingship would be reestablished by the Messiah. If you grab this reading guide, And I hope you will. I hope you'll do it in this to help you better understand these genealogies. It'll point you to the story of Tamar and to the story of Bathsheba, which you can read for yourselves. And you'll discover that these women are cruelly treated by God's people. And yet, God protects them, God honors them, and ultimately, God makes a place for them in God's people. And even the stories of Rahab and Ruth, which aren't quite as complicated. Rahab was a temple prostitute for an enemy nation. Ruth was a widow from the hated Moabites. They had the kind of stories that you would want to ignore. That's what they had. They're just the kind of stories you would want to leave out of your family tree if you could let yourself. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to learn a lot more from the genealogy of Jesus, his family tree, which is our family tree. But today, I just want us to learn the most obvious parts. Number one, it's the genealogy of a king. And number two, the least likely people to be included in this story get included on purpose. And they get singled out for special attention so you can't miss them. And this good news, the good news about who is included in the family tree of Jesus, it would have mattered to Matthew. Because do you want to know who else had a story that would make them unlikely to be included in the family of Jesus? Matthew did. Now, he was not a foreign woman, so he didn't have those two things. But he did have a story. If you want to know more about Matthew's story, go to our Matthew resource page. The first of the weekly videos is already up, and in it my dad talks a lot about who Matthew was and why he was such an unlikely Jesus follower. But the short version is this. Matthew was a Roman tax collector, which means he was a traitor to his own people. He was a Jewish man working with the Roman government to oppress his own people. Matthew was a living act of treason. And if you had asked Matthew, will there be space for you in the Messiah's family tree, he would have known the answer. No. No, the Messiah's family tree won't include me. I won't be part of the Messiah's family. So you can be sure it matters to Matthew that the family tree of Jesus included the unlikeliest of people who had complicated backgrounds and complicated stories, had a whole list of reasons that they too wouldn't be included in Jesus' family. And maybe it matters to you too. Maybe it matters to you to know that unlikely people are included in our family tree. Maybe you worry you couldn't fit into the family of Jesus because you aren't the right kind of people. You look around and they're, like, oh, they got it all together and my life's all messed up. Well, first of all, no, they don't. Their life's messed up too. But secondly, look at the family tree of Jesus. Look again at Matthew chapter 1. There's room for you. Maybe you feel like a foreigner, like you don't belong in this county or this city or this church or this world. You feel like you will always be on the outside looking in, and there is no genuine welcome for the complexity of you and your story. Well, then look again at the family tree of Jesus. You are welcome in this place. Maybe you, like Tamar or Bathsheba, maybe you were hurt by the family of God. Maybe someone who was part of God's people, in fact, did you harm. And you wonder if you could ever be welcome in this place. if you wonder if you could ever bring your story of hurt and injury to this place and be received with welcome and understanding and love, well, then I would say, look again at the family tree of Jesus. And if you ever wonder if you belong in God's family, go read Matthew 1 again. I promise you, if you came to me and told me your story and put it to the test, I would say, oh, there's room for you in Jesus' family tree. And since Jesus' family tree is my family tree, that means there's room for you at my family tree. And that is sort of the second lesson we have to learn from this, right? If everyone, no matter their story, no matter their nationality, no matter their history, is welcome into the family tree of Jesus, and we are part of the family tree of Jesus, then that means everyone is welcome into our family tree too. We're like the kids at Thanksgiving who get no choice over who's invited. Oh, you invited them. They're so boring. They always tell me how much I've grown. They're like, I don't care. They're coming to Thanksgiving. Deal with it. And in much the same way, we are not in charge of the fact that God invites everybody into his family. Like maybe you wouldn't have made the same list. You're like, you don't understand, God. I would have left some people off the invitations. And God's like, yeah, but there are a lot of other people who would have left you off. So aren't you glad I'm in charge of who gets invited? And I invited you, and I invited the least likely person you can think of. And so as a church, we're just committed around here. We are not going to give in to our culture's tendency to reject people and push them away because of their story or their background or the complexity of what they bring to the table. We will welcome those who feel unwelcome, and we will love those who feel unloved. Maybe you grabbed one of these invite cards. I love these things. I hope you grabbed a bunch. We've got more. Maybe you're going to use it to invite somebody to Christmas Eve. Do me a favor. Would you go out of your way to invite people who might not know they're welcome? Invite people who might be worried there's no room for them in Jesus' family tree. And then when those people show up, let's all work together to especially show love to the people who might be left out. You know? I remember once, it was a long time ago, I was probably 20, and I was a youth minister. There was a kid who'd come a couple times on Wednesday nights, and I saw him come for the first time on a Sunday morning, and at first I was so glad, and then I was so worried, because he'd just gotten a brand new t-shirt he was so proud of. It was a Megadeth t-shirt, and he was wearing this brand new, he had dressed up for church, wearing the fanciest article of clothing he had, this terrible t-shirt, you know. Anyways, and I was so worried about what people would do. And after church, I had gotten to talk to him a little bit. After church, one of the little old ladies of the church came up to me and said, Ethan, did you see that new boy that came to church? I was like, yes, I did. I told her his name. He's been coming to youth group a couple weeks. Did you see that shirt he was wearing? Like, yes, I did. She said, you know, I took one look at that shirt, and I just got worried people weren't going to treat him right. So I took him a donut, and I sat with him. That way I could make sure. I love that lady. We can do that. Notice the people who might worry they're not welcome, and live out the family tree of Jesus. Let me pray for you. God, we thank you that we did not write the guest list for the invitations, but you did. We thank you even for things that seem as boring as a genealogy. For in them it is revealed that you have welcomed the unlikely, and you have loved those we thought were unlovable, and that even includes us. May we do the same in our world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Church, let's stand and worship together. If you need prayer today, I'll be over here with some friends. I'd love to pray for you. If today's the day you need to take a step toward Jesus, maybe you were worried that my story wouldn't be welcome in this family. You are welcome. I would love to hear your story and welcome you. You are welcome today. Come meet me for prayer over in the corner.